So good evening, everybody. So it's about 9 o'clock. You've all had a full day. You have a full stomach. You have a complete redistribution of blood volume to your gut. So I'm a little concerned that I can keep everybody alert and attentive to the talk. I want to just spend 45 minutes or so, maybe an hour, and talk about this whole notion of digital health from a bit of a functional, practical, and philosophical perspective today. So I want to have some fun. If we want to have questions, if you think something pops up, just raise your hand. I'd like it to make it a little bit more fun, a little bit more iterative, just because of where we are, the time, and a fairly small group. And I'm probably going to walk around. So I run a little think tank that looks at this dynamic, what's going on in technology, and how do we best put that into perspective. It's a really interesting point in time in the universe. And there are a few key things that I'd like to share with you. I'd like you to kind of feel empowered about. And the first one is that today is a very special and interesting time in human history. People often talk about things like the Gutenberg Moment as being this fundamental transition point in human history. As a guy who works with Google, it's kind of interesting because the Gutenberg press basically allowed us to take information and disseminate it. And in a very interesting way, that's similar to what the web has done. But I don't think that's the name of the game here today. I don't think it's about a Gutenberg moment. In fact, I think it's a lot bigger. That's why I think the key takeaway here is that we're all very lucky to be alive now. And I want to discuss this in the context of what I call a techno optimist, because I know that there's issues around compliance, cybersecurity, HIPAA, all that kind of stuff. And I don't want to get weighed down in that. It's a very, very important discussion. But I think today, the post-prandial, full-belly, couple cocktail discussion should be a little bit more optimistic and not so dour, if you don't mind. So I'll try to kind of do it that way. I want to introduce a concept that I recently kind of stumbled over. I made it up. And it's this idea of IQ and EQ. Now, we all know what IQ is. I think it's a very important clinical determinant. If we have kids, you want your kids to be smart. You want them to have a good IQ because living in the cognitive world is important. But there's also this notion of EQ. Now, EQ is our emotional quotient. So I want my kids growing up to be smart, but I also want them to be empathic. I want them to have a sense of humanity. And that's an important distinction. But what I'm finding today, and this is a brand new term, I wrote about this in my blog in Psychology today, is the notion of TQ, the notion of a technology quotient. I just want to share that as sort of something that's sort of on people's radar that they're talking about. And it's a simple idea. The idea is our ability to assimilate technology into our lives will become a functional determinant of our success. Think about that for a minute. When your kids are in school, you want them to assimilate knowledge. You want them to assimilate this emotional connectivity with people. But our ability to grasp, understand, and assimilate technology is really becoming important. I'm seeing this all over the place. Now, whether it's a student in school, whether it's a marketer being able to use SEO, search engine optimization, in a marketing plan, or even a clinician. And when I speak with medical students, I'm finding today that they find technology, and these are to the medical students today, they find technology as the savior to the profession. Interestingly, if you talk to a 50-year-old physician today, he or she might tell you that technology is the curse of the profession in many interesting ways. So I'm going to throw that out as something new, something I'm working on, but it's this notion of your technological quotient. Your ability to assimilate information and technology is in part a determinant to your success. So when I talk about digital health, I don't talk about activity trackers. How many people here are wearing an activity tracker now? 1, 2, 5, not okay, a pretty good amount. I have my activity, I don't call it activity tracker, I actually call it a dust collector. I have a whole stack of them on my bedroom there. I fail to charge them. But I don't want that to define digital health today. I don't want you to think about activity trackers in the context that they currently exist, because while they are important, I'll tell you the simple and principal role of an activity tracker today. It's allowing people who are fit to woo partners. That's what it is. It's the guys at the gym who are buff, who have their 12,000 steps, the heck with 10,000 steps. It's a badge of honor. People are wearing it on their ankle now sometimes. But I don't see the 65-year-old man with metabolic syndrome reaching out and grabbing that activity tracker as a panacea to wellness. It's not happening. In fact, it's antithetical to what's going on. And the reason is that when we look at these activity trackers, they are an athletic option. And we have to shift them to a clinical imperative. That's the fundamental dynamic that we need to do. And I'm going to go through some examples about how we can maybe do that. I'll give you one example just off the bat, since I'm walking, is that steps are great. But what about using that same 3D accelerometer that is just as cheap and just as easy to acquire a signal and measure gait, tremor, and look at it in the context of movement disorders to optimize therapy for patients with Parkinson's syndrome? See what we just did? We took an activity tracker and we changed the game. We made it into a movement disorder sensor to optimize therapy in Parkinson's disease. What do? We moved it from an athletic option, from the jock in the gym, to the guy on the couch. So these are kind of the things that I think about and I try to study and put into context. Let me go back real quick. But when I talk about digital health today, this is a slide that's a year old that came out of Singularity University, a great meeting out in San Diego. But when you look at what's going on in Singularity, the words are artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning, neuromedicine, AR, VR, medical education. So when we think of the technological application in health, it's much broader than what a lot of people's sort of initial perspective. I talked to a brand team about a digital health initiative, and what do they think of? Build an app, right? Something like that. It's not unimportant, but when I look at digital health, when I look at the next 3 to 5 years, I see amazing changes that are occurring. So I just want to put that on people's radar. Now, here's where we are now. And I started my talk a little bit about this and saying that it's a great time to be alive. I don't mean that lightly. I really, really mean that seriously. I've studied this extensively and talked with a lot of really, really interesting people about this. And we are at a profound inflection point in human history. The game is changing. And it's changing from a host of perspectives, and this sort of captures it in a bit of a cartoon. But if you want to kind of build it in, if you want to take the spots and talk with our famous Gutenberg printing press that's way on the end over here, and we look at the evolution of things, we're seeing amazing applications of technology. In fact, one of them is really the fundamental game changer. When this thing happens, and it's actually happening now, it's going to be the central disruptive reality that's going to change our lives. Anybody want to guess? I heard something in the back. Yes, sir? You're exactly right. That was great. That was good. I'm going to kind of put it in a little bit of social context, but I think that the evolution of the car is going to change things the way something else did a few years ago. And I'm going to try to bring that into comparison to talk about it. Accelerated growth, everyone knows about Moore's law, processing speed, doubling every 12 to 16 months. My favorite sort of joke is EROM's law, or E-Room's law, I guess with the way you pronounce it. It's Moore's law backwards, and that's the accelerating cost of drug development. So everybody always kind of chuckles about it, but it's sad, because when we look at these exponential changes, these disruptive changes in the world, we see the converse of that of extraordinarily expensive drugs and extraordinarily expensive drug development. The other interesting curve here that I often talk about is this notion of genomic sequencing. And genomic sequencing, if you look at the price of that, that's coming down very, very, very quickly. Full genome analysis now, how much? What would you be willing to pay? 600, yeah. 800 if you want it in 24 hours. You could even, it's a full sequence, though. You can get a partial sequence for almost nothing. 23andMe is $99 now, but you're not really getting a full genomic sequence. Here's the interesting thing. I think it's going to go to zero. I think it's going down so fast that it's going to be a Google dynamic. We'll give you a map for you to use in Google Maps or Waze, and you give us your data. Same thing with genomics. We'll give you a full sequence. It's free. It's underwritten by a company like Illumina or Human Longevity.